Sit, I commanded, gesturing toward the deck floor. She sat, cross-legged, comfortable, with the easy posture of someone settling in for a long and leisurely conversation. No hunching, no trembling, no desperate attempt to make herself smaller. She simply sat and looked up at me with patient, attentive eyes. I drew myself to full height. Coal draft males stand nearly 8 feet tall, and I am considered large even among our kind. I have used my stature to end confrontations before a single word was spoken. The sheer physical scale of me standing over this tiny human creature should have reduced her to something small and frightened. She blinked at me, waiting. "You will provide access codes to your vessel's cargo hold," I said, letting my voice drop to its most threatening register. "You will also provide contact information for whoever holds responsibility for you, an employer, a government representative, someone with authority to negotiate terms for your release. Refuse, and things will become very unpleasant for you very quickly." She tilted her head, just slightly, just that small curious angle, like a creature encountering something mildly puzzling. "The cargo hold is empty," she said. "The ship was returning from a delivery run, and I don't really have an employer in the traditional sense." "Do not lie to me," I snarled, leaning down until my face was close to Hayes, fangs fully visible. Up close, the size difference was even more stark and dramatic. She was a toy soldier standing before a mountain. "I'm not lying," she said calmly. "We use military transport frames for all kinds of civilian operations. Cargo, personnel, supply logistics, whatever needs moving. They are durable and reliable." "Military transport," Thalrix interjected from his sensor station, his tone carrying a thread of uncertainty I didn't like. "Commander, her vessel has military-grade shield generators and reinforced hull plating, but there are no weapon systems installed. It's quite unusual." "See," the human said helpfully. "Just a transport. Nothing exciting." I felt my jaw tightening, which has never been a welcome sensation. This was wrong. The entire texture of this interaction was wrong. Hostages follow predictable emotional patterns. They bargain. They weep. They promise things they cannot deliver. They make desperate attempts at manipulation. This human was doing none of those things. She was sitting on my deck floor answering my questions as if this were an informal debriefing she had agreed to attend. "What is your name?" I demanded. "Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Torres," she said, without a single beat of hesitation. "United Earth Defense Force, Fleet Logistics Division." I stared at her. Lieutenant Commander. A military officer. My brain stumbled over that information, trying unsuccessfully to reconcile the rank with the person sitting so calmly before me. Something in my chest that I would later identify as the first quiet tremor of genuine unease began to stir. "Prove it," I said. "Identification." She reached slowly into her jumpsuit pocket, careful, deliberate, showing me the motion, and produced a small rectangular card, which she held up between 2 fingers. "Here you go." I snatched it from her hand, ready to examine whatever laughable credential she was presenting. That card, that small, ordinary, completely innocent-looking piece of laminated plastic. That was a precise moment my day began to fall apart at the seams. The card was standard-sized, lightweight, unremarkable in every physical sense. Her photograph was printed on one side, slightly younger, substantially more serious than the relaxed person currently sitting on my floor. My translator implant processed the human text automatically. Name, Torres, Rebecca Ann. Rank, Lieutenant Commander. Service number, long alphanumeric string. Organization, United Earth Defense Force. The reverse side carried blood type information, issue and expiration dates, a magnetic strip, and an embedded microchip. All standard, all completely boring. "This is it," I said, holding the card up with undisguised contempt. "This flimsy piece of plastic constitutes your official military credential." "That's it," she confirmed cheerfully, "though I also have a biometric profile in the system, but you probably can't access that from here." I turned the card over again, searching for something, anything, that might explain why this woman seemed so utterly untouched by her circumstances. Military rank meant almost nothing. Humans had 2 centuries of space travel behind them. What genuine combat experience could they possibly have accumulated? A few border disputes, maybe some light counter-piracy operations. Then I noticed a small print running along the bottom edge. Service record summary, awards and commendations, condensed into abbreviated codes. My translator struggled with some of the shorthand, reaching into the Galactic Council's military database for definitions. Purple Heart, 3 awards. Combat wounds. She had been wounded in combat 3 separate times. Bronze Star, 2 awards. Valor during military operations. There were 6 more abbreviations, each one resolving to commendations for distinguished combat service, outstanding performance under fire, and exceptional operational achievement. Something cold moved down the length of my spine. Thalrix, I said quietly, access the Galactic Council military archives. Search for human military operations, last 50 cycles, all records. Thalrix's ear frills flattened in confusion. Commander? Now! The bridge fell into a hushed, uncertain silence. My crew watched me, then watched the human, then watched me again, trying to understand why their commander had suddenly gone still in quiet mid-interrogation. Selprick still had her rifle vaguely directed at our captive, though her grip had grown uncertain. I kept reading. There was another section below the commendations, smaller text, nearly microscopic, listing deployment history, locations, dates, a timeline of places this woman had been sent, Proxima conflict, Kepler Station defense, the Arcturus Incident, New Heb's campaign. I stopped breathing. The Arcturus Incident. Every military officer in this sector knew that name. It was required reading in tactical academies across 6 species. It had entered the databases as a case study in catastrophic escalation, a mining station territorial dispute that spiraled within 72 hours into a full-scale multi-species battle involving over 60 warships from 4 different powers. When the final accounting was done, 14 ships left that battle intact. 4 to 6 did not. I looked at the human sitting cross-legged on my deck floor, hands resting loosely in her lap, expression patient and pleasant. Thalrix, I said, and my voice came out in a register I barely recognized as my own. Tell me about human involvement in the Arcturus Incident. Thalrix worked his console, his ear frills now pressed completely flat, a physical tell that among our species signals deep discomfort. Commander, according to records, humans deployed 3 vessels to Arcturus as part of Galactic Council peacekeeping force. The engagement lasted 6 days. Human forces sustained 47% casualties. He paused, and I pressed, and they held their assigned defense perimeter against overwhelming opposition. The battle assessment specifically credits human forces with preventing total station collapse and the massacre of approximately 12,000 civilian workers. The coldness in my spine was no longer localized. It was spreading. New Heb's campaign. I said, pull that record too. More typing. A longer pause. 18-month ground operation. Joint Species Task Force. Human provided specialized infantry units throughout. Another pause, longer this time. The campaign performance report lists human forces as having both the highest mission success rate and the highest enemy engagement rate of any participating species. Highest enemy engagement rate. Military language is often elegant in its evasion. That phrase, stripped of its sterile professionalism, means they killed the most. I looked at the card again, really looked at it. The issue date was 12 cycles ago. The deployment history stretched back 11 years before that. 11 years of continuous military operations across multiple active conflict zones, and she was 34 years old by human reckoning. How old are you? I asked, and the question came out quieter than I intended. 34, Rebecca Torres said. A faint smile had appeared at the corner of her mouth, small and controlled, like someone carefully keeping a larger expression contained. She had been in active military service for nearly a third of her entire life. She had been wounded in combat 3 times and kept returning. She had survived Arcturus, where ships went to become wreckage and crews went to become memorial entries in the Galactic Council databases. And I had taken her hostage. Oh no, I whispered. Oh yes, she replied, and now the smile was no longer small. My hands were shaking. A cold draft commander with 17 cycles of service, 8 successful campaigns, decorated twice for tactical excellence, and my hands were trembling while holding a piece of laminated plastic the size of my palm. I set it down on the console edge carefully, the way you set down something you suspect might be armed. "Falrix," I said, with tremendous effort towards steadiness. "Cross-reference her service number against all available human military databases the Galactic Council has on file. Full record access." A long beat of silence. "Commander, are you certain you want to do that right now, sir?" "Do it." The bridge crew had gone absolutely still. The normal ambient sounds of the razor wing, the hum of systems, the soft chirp of sensors, suddenly felt very loud in the absence of conversation. Selprix had lowered her rifle without appearing to realize she'd done it. The console beeped. Falrix made a sound I can only describe as a whimper. "Commander." His voice had taken on the peculiar flat tone of someone reading information they desperately wish they weren't reading. "Lieutenant Commander Torres has completed 247 combat missions on record. She has been awarded field promotions twice. She has logged over 8,000 hours of operations in active combat zones. She has survived 4 ship destructions and 6 ground assaults." A pause. "And there are special operations classifications on her record. They're redacted, even from Council access. 247 missions. I had completed 31 in my entire career, and I was considered highly experienced within our fleet. Her role, I managed. What was a primary function in these operations?" Falrix cleared his throat, an involuntary cold-draft gesture that means we are deeply uncomfortable with what we are about to say. "She is designated as a combat logistics officer, sir, which apparently involved coordinating supply lines and personnel movement through active war zones." He paused again. "But her additional certifications include advanced combat tactics, ship-to-ship boarding operations, explosive ordnance disposal, and—" He stopped. "Finish it." "Close quarters battle instruction, sir. She trained personnel in hand-to-hand combat operations. She taught people how to kill, in small spaces, up close." I became very aware, in that moment, of the distance between myself and Rebecca Torres, and that the distance was not nearly as reassuring as it had been 10 minutes ago. She was sitting 6 feet from me, completely relaxed, without a weapon I could see, looking mildly entertained by the gradually dawning horror spreading across my bridge. Krell, my navigation officer, had been quietly reading from his own console. His voice came out slightly higher than its normal register when he spoke. "Commander, she has more combined combat experience than our entire crew, including you." "Thank you, Krell," I said through teeth that had pressed themselves together, "for that tremendously helpful observation." Torres was very visibly trying not to laugh. Her shoulders were doing something involuntary and rhythmic. "The Proxima conflict," I said, turning back to her with the grim determination of someone who has decided to excavate their own grave one precise shovelful at a time. "You were there." "Yeah," she said, nodding in that easy, conversational way. "That was my second deployment. Actually, pretty rough tour. We lost a lot of good people at Proxima." A slight pause, a slight shift in her expression. Not grief exactly, but something quieter and more permanent than grief. The look of someone who has made peace with a terrible mathematics. I was just a junior lieutenant back then, running supply shuttles between fleet assets and the ground forces. Got shot down twice in 1 week. A small, rueful almost smile. Not exactly my finest performance. She said it the way you might describe accidentally boning a meal. "Kepler Station." I continued, something hollow opening in my chest. "The siege. 70,000 defenders." 70,000 and change, she corrected gently. "And 5 months, not 4. The histories often get that wrong. I was coordinating ammunition distribution through the final push." A brief, quiet exhale. "I don't think I slept more than a few hours at a stretch for the last 3 weeks of the campaign. But we held the station. So on balance, it worked out. Kepler Station was taught at military academies across a dozen species as a definitive example of an impossible defensive situation somehow, inexplicably, succeeding against all mathematical probability. Commanders analyze its final month the way scholars analyze ancient texts, searching for the hidden principle that explained the outcome. She had been inside it, running ammunition to the defenders, I remembered a tactical intelligence briefing from roughly 6 cycles ago. The officer presenting had looked almost apologetic, as though embarrassed to say the words aloud. Humans, he had said, do not process acceptable losses the way we do. They have a cultural framework, almost a doctrine, centered on the principle they describe as never leaving anyone behind. They will compromise strategic positioning to recover wounded personnel. They will accept significant tactical disadvantages to protect non-combatants. They will endure conditions that our psychological model suggests should produce complete combat breakdown. He had shuffled his notes. And somehow, against the probability assessments, they frequently succeed. I had dismissed that briefing at the time. Species always inflated their own military mythology. It was standard interstellar posturing. But sitting here now, watching Rebecca Torres, who had been wounded 3 times and gone back, who had survived a battle where 4 to 6 ships burned, who had held an impossible line for 5 months on insufficient sleep and pure obstinacy, I understood. The intelligence officer had not been exaggerating. He had been doing his best to communicate something that didn't fit into the framework we had for understanding military capability, and he had been right, and I had been too arrogant to hear him. The silence on my bridge was complete. I could hear the ventilation systems working. So, Torres said, her tone shifting back to the pleasant conversational register she'd maintained throughout. I noticed you disabled my ship. That's going to create a scheduling problem. Actually, I have a delivery commitment, medical supplies to Research Station Gamma. I'm supposed to arrive by Thursday. If I miss that window, some very important doctors are going to be exceptionally unhappy. Medical supplies, I repeated, and the word came out of my mouth as if from a great distance. That's what I do now. Mostly. Supply coordination for research outposts and colony stations, paperwork runs, logistics management, the unglamorous stuff. She glanced around the bridge with the same curious, unbothered expression she'd worn throughout. After 15 years of forward deployments, I figured I'd earn an easy assignment. This was her easy assignment. Supply runs through the Outer Rim territories. This was what passed for a quiet posting in the life of Rebecca Torres. I was going to die. We were all going to die. In the end, the decision made itself with the clean, undeniable logic of pure survival instinct. I was no longer a captor conducting a ransom negotiation. I was a diplomat, a deeply apologetic, rapidly perspiring, existentially terrified diplomat who needed to undo the last 3 hours with as much dignity as could be salvaged from a wreckage. Lieutenant Commander Torres, I said, carefully setting her identification card down on the console with both hands, as though it were an explosive device with a proximity sensor. I believe there has been a substantial misunderstanding today. One eyebrow went up. Just one. The other remained perfectly level. I have since wondered if humans train specifically to do that, or if it comes naturally. A misunderstanding, she said, and I could hear the amusement sitting just beneath the surface of those 2 words, barely contained. Yes, I said, pressing forward. You see, our initial scan flagged your vessel as an unregistered transport operating in a restricted sector corridor. Standard patrol error. Sensor readings in this region can be deeply unreliable under certain stellar conditions. These false positive identifications are, regrettably, quite common. Your sensors work perfectly fine, sir, Thalric said quietly from his station. I turned to look at him with an expression that I hoped communicated something on the order of, I will have you reassigned to waste reclamation on an ice mining station if you say another word. He went quiet. The point is, I continued, marshalling every reserve of composure I possessed, we absolutely did not intend to detain a decorated officer of the United Earth Defense Force who was clearly engaged in legitimate humanitarian logistics operations. This situation is embarrassing for all parties involved, and I want to be clear that we take full institutional responsibility for the confusion. Torres folded her arms across her chest. So I'm not a hostage anymore. You were never a hostage, I said, with as much dignified conviction as I could assemble. You were temporarily detained for routine identification verification, which you have now satisfactorily provided. We sincerely regret any inconvenience caused by our procedural diligence. You used the word hostage specifically, she said, about 10 minutes ago, and something about a ransom from my, and I'm quoting here, pathetic Earth government. Why do humans remember exact phrasing with such weaponized precision? A translation error, I said. The cold draft term, it renders poorly into standard galactic common. What I actually intended to convey was temporary guest pending administrative verification. The nuance is difficult to preserve across languages. Uh-huh, she said. We also, I pressed on desperately, pointed weapons at your temporary guest during her administrative verification. Selprick said from somewhere behind me, and I spun to find her looking at her own rifle with the expression of someone wishing they could pretend it belonged to someone else. Safety protocols, I said through clenched teeth. Standard aboard this vessel. It is not personal. We point weapons at everyone. Torres had both hands pressed against her mouth now. Her shoulders were absolutely shaking. The rest of my bridge crew had pulled up her full service record on their own terminals. I could see the information spreading from station to station like a rising tide, and with it, the collective color draining from my crew. Krell was making a thin, high-pitched sound through his nostrils that I believed indicated he was hyperventilating. Vesprick at the communications station had placed both hands flat on the console in front of her and appeared to be practicing controlled breathing exercises. I turned back to Torres and spread my hands in what I hoped projected peaceful, non-threatening goodwill. Lieutenant Commander, I believe we got off on a poor footing today. A fresh start seems appropriate. I am Commander Verloch. The Razor Wing is a legitimate patrol vessel maintaining trade security across this sector. We have perhaps been overly aggressive in our protocols, and— You're pirates, she said. We prefer the designation independent security contractors. You kidnapped me and quoted a ransom price. What I described was a mutually beneficial resource exchange to facilitate your return to. She laughed, not a polite, restrained laugh. A real one, full and genuine, echoing off the walls of my command deck. The sound was completely disarming and completely mortifying, and it made every single person on my bridge flinch in unison as though a weapon had been discharged. Okay, Commander Verloch, she said, when she had collected herself, eyes bright with what I suspected was the most fun she'd had in months. I genuinely appreciate the effort you're putting into this. The diplomatic backpedaling is impressive. Honestly, you've got real talent for it. But here's my actual concern. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. I have a delivery deadline. I'm already 3 hours behind schedule because you shot out my engines. There are doctors at Research Station Gamma waiting on medical supplies, and I need to be moving. We will repair your vessel immediately, I said. Thalrix, dispatch an engineering team to her ship, full priority, complete repairs. We don't carry compatible components for human drive systems, sir, Thalrix said, with the tone of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Of course we didn't. Why would we? Because I had never, in 17 cycles of raiding Outer Rim shipping, anticipated a situation in which I would desperately need to repair the ship of someone I had just accidentally attempted to ransom. Because I was, as I was rapidly and comprehensively discovering, an idiot. What followed was 6 of the longest hours of my professional life. 6 hours of my engineering team working aboard her vessel, nervous, apologetic, meticulous, attempting to adapt components that were almost but not quite right, using tools that were designed for slightly different specifications. They worked without complaint and without breaks, driven by a motivation I had never witnessed in them before, which I can only describe as a productive terror of people who have suddenly understood the full consequences of failure. While they worked, Rebecca Torres sat in our crew quarters. She drank our best imported reserves. She accepted a meal from our galley with genuine appreciation, and she talked with my crew. I heard the stories afterward, in fragments, from crew members who recounted them with the wide, slightly unfocused expressions of people who have witnessed something that has permanently adjusted their internal calibration. She told them about a supply operation during the Kepler siege in which she'd had to improvise a cargo delivery route through an active artillery bombardment because all 3 primary routes had collapsed simultaneously. She told them about the time she performed field repairs on a disabled shuttle propulsion system while enemy ground forces were advancing on her position, using only the tools in her emergency kit and what she described as creative problem-solving under pressure. She told them about Arcturus, not the battle statistics or the strategic analysis, but the 6 days themselves, the noise and the cold and the faces of the people she'd work alongside, some of whom hadn't come back. She talked about it the way experienced soldiers talk about things they survived, not with drama or performance, but with a steady, honest matter-of-factness of someone who has looked at the worst the universe can produce and decided to keep getting up anyway. 3 members of my crew requested trauma counseling afterward. 2 others asked me quietly if there was a way to request a transfer to a different sector. When the repairs were finally complete, I walked her to her ship personally. I wanted to be absolutely certain she departed cleanly, with no loose threads, no misunderstandings, no incident reports filed in triplicate with the Galactic Council's Records Division. I wanted this interaction to end as quietly and as thoroughly as anything I had ever wanted in my life. We stood together in her cargo bay, the same vast space where 8 of my warriors had stormed in with weapons and battle cries and absolute certainty, barely 6 hours ago. "Thank you for your cooperation during this regrettable misunderstanding," I said formally, pouring every ounce of remaining dignity into the words. She extended her hand toward me, that strange, characteristically human gesture of greeting or parting that involves a grasping of right hands. I had encountered it in cultural briefings, but never participated in it directly. I stared at her hand for a moment, then extended 2 fingers of my own and let her grip them. She shook once, firm, brief, completely confident. "No hard feelings," she said. "Honestly, this broke up what was going to be a pretty boring supply run. And your engineering team did excellent work on the drive assembly. Better than I expected, actually." "I am glad to hear it," I said, and meant it only in the sense that it meant she was leaving. "I hope your journey continues without incident," I offered. She climbed into the pilot's seat, began running her pre-flight sequence with easy familiarity, and then paused with her hand on the startup controls. "Oh, one more thing." I stopped breathing entirely. "My current assignment, the one I mentioned." She turned to look at me with that same calm, pleasant expression she had worn since the moment my boarding team had found her in that cargo bay. "I'm actually the new logistics coordinator for the Earth Defense Force's Outer Rim expansion project. We've been commissioned to establish supply infrastructure for the next wave of human research stations and colony outposts throughout this territory." A brief, measured pause. "You'll probably be seeing significantly more human vessels operating in this corridor over the next several years. I just thought, as a courtesy, you might want to factor that into your operational planning going forward." She smiled one final time, small, warm, and absolutely devastating, and sealed her airlock. The razor-wing sensor array tracked her ship across the next 40 minutes as she performed systems checks, aligned her navigation for the jump point, and finally accelerated to faster-than-light transit. I stood at my command console and watched every single second of it. When her drive signature finally vanished from our scopes, every person on my bridge exhaled at precisely the same moment. The sound was like a pressure release valve finally given permission to open. The silence that followed lasted a long time. My report to High Command was 4 paragraphs long and contained almost no information. Routine patrol, encountered civilian transport, verified credentials during standard inspection, provided minor technical assistance with drive systems. No incidents of note. Proceeding with standard operations. I did not mention the word hostage. I did not mention the panic, or Krell's hyperventilation, or the 3 crew members currently discussing their feelings with the ship's medical counselor. I absolutely did not mention the part where a single human woman sitting cross-legged on my deck floor had, in the space of approximately 4 to 5 minutes, transformed a confident and experienced cold draft commander into a man who was seriously reconsidering his entire career. That same day, I drafted a new operational directive and distributed it to every vessel in our patrol network. Before intercepting any unidentified transport, conduct comprehensive biological scan. If human life signs are detected, do not proceed with standard protocols. Do not fire warning shots. Do not attempt communication. Verify identity and military status through secure channels before any interaction whatsoever. If military status is confirmed, disengage immediately. Find another patrol sector. File a false equipment malfunction. Report if necessary. Take an unexpected leave of absence. Consider early retirement. Do not, under any circumstances, engage. Several of my squadron commanders asked for clarification. I told them to trust me. Here is what I understand now about humans, what I did not understand then, and what I suspect most of the galaxy has not yet properly reckoned with. They do not posture. They do not inflate their capabilities or perform their danger. They do not fill rooms with threats and demonstrations and elaborate shows of force the way most species do when they want to be taken seriously. They walk into rooms calmly. They sit down. They answer your questions with complete honesty. They smile. They say okay when you take them hostage, and they sit on your deck floor and patiently wait for you to understand what okay means coming from them. And then their identification card, that small, ordinary piece of laminated plastic, does all the communicating that demeanor refused to do. 247 missions, 3 combat wounds, 5 months inside Kepler, 6 days at Arcturus, where the math said no one should have survived. Not bravado, not mythology, not exaggeration, just facts, offered plainly, without performance, to anyone willing to look carefully enough. I put in for a sector transfer the following morning, somewhere quieter, somewhere closer to the galactic interior, where shipping corridors were established and trade agreements were old and the universe was, on balance, more predictable, somewhere that human expansion had not yet reached. The transfer officer reviewed my request, cross-referenced available postings, and delivered the response I should have anticipated. There were no such sectors available. Humans were everywhere now, moving through the outer rim in their military-frame transports, establishing research outposts and colony infrastructure, coordinating supply lines across routes that had belonged to other species for generations. They had arrived 2 centuries ago as newcomers, cautious and unfamiliar, and in the span of that cosmically brief time they had spread themselves across the galaxy's edge with a quiet, determined, unstoppable energy of something that has decided it belongs everywhere and is not particularly interested in anyone else's objections. I thought about Rebecca Torres flying toward Research Station Gamma, 3 hours behind schedule, carrying medical supplies for doctors she'd never met, whistling something to herself in her empty cargo bay, and probably finding the whole afternoon mildly amusing in retrospect. I thought about the 4 to 6 ships that went to Arcturus and didn't come back. I thought about the smile she'd given me at the end, that small, final, perfectly calibrated smile that communicated approximately 1,000 things simultaneously, all of them variations on the same essential message. I know exactly what you are, and I know exactly what I am, and I think you understand now too. My new career philosophy is simple, and I have shared it freely with every officer under my command who will listen. Check their identification first. Apologize comprehensively second. Withdraw immediately after. It lacks elegance. It lacks the dignity I spent 17 cycles building. It will never appear in a tactical manual or in a commendation from high command. But it is, without question, the smartest thing I have ever decided. And if Rebecca Torres ever passes through the sector again, if her senses pick up the Razor Wing running a very quiet, very unintrusive patrol far away from any human shipping lanes, I hope she remembers us fondly. I hope she knows we have learned. And I hope, above all other things, that she is very busy elsewhere. Thank you for reading this story on Hybrid Shadows. If you enjoyed this tale, drop a comment below. And remember, the universe is a large place, but apparently not large enough to hide from a logistics officer with 247 missions and a very pleasant smile. Let me tell you something about ambushing cargo vessels in the Outer Rim territories. After 17 cycles of doing exactly that, I can say with absolute authority that it is the easiest duty assignment in the entire Koldrath Imperial fleet. The formula never changes. You find a slow-moving transport lumbering through the shipping lanes like a fat animal unaware of the predator nearby. You fire a single warning shot across their bow, not to damage, just to remind them that the universe is an unkind place. Within seconds, they cut their engines, and the begging begins. Always the begging. Clean, simple, profitable. My crew and I had turned it into something close to an art form. So when my sensor officer Thaurix announced that we had a human transport vessel on our scopes, I did not even bother shifting in my command chair. Humans, the galaxy's newest guests, barely 200 cycles removed from their first contact with interstellar civilization, and already convinced they belonged at every table and on every trade route between here and the galactic core. Their ambition was almost admirable, if it weren't so laughable. Their ships were laughably underarmed. Their crews were soft, untested, nurtured by a civilization that had enjoyed relative peace during its short venture into space. Every encounter I'd had with a human vessel had ended the same way, panicked voices over the calm, white-knuckled compliance, and cargo transferred without incident. Intercept course, I said, examining my claws with theatrical boredom. Standard intimidation protocol. My bridge crew of 12 moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. The Razor Wing was not the largest ship in our fleet, but she was fast, beautifully, terrifyingly fast, and her weapon system could reduce a cargo hauler to spinning wreckage in under 30 seconds. Not that we ever needed to actually fire. The threat alone was always sufficient. Fear is a remarkably effective weapon when wielded by someone who understands it. The human vessel tried to run. They always try to run. It is, honestly, almost endearing, watching them push their pathetic engines to maximum burn as if raw desperation could somehow allow a cargo shuttle to outrun a military interceptor. We close the distance in less than 4 minutes. "They are hailing us, Commander," Thalrix reported, his ear frills twitching with poly-concealed amusement. "Ignore it," I said, rising from my chair and stretching my lower arms with a long, satisfied roll of my shoulders. "Disable their engine core. Gently, we want the cargo intact." Our gunner, Selprix, put a precision pulse shot directly through their propulsion housing. Beautiful work. Surgical. The human ship went dark almost instantly, dead in space, silent as a tomb, exactly as planned. I could practically feel the terror radiating through their hull from across the void. I had cultivated that feeling deliberately over 17 cycles. It was a cornerstone of effective piracy. "Boarding team with me," I announced, striding toward the docking bay with the loose confidence of someone who had done this at least 300 times before and found it boring each time. The boarding went exactly as expected, at first. We cut through their airlock with professional efficiency, stormed into the cargo bay with weapons raised and battle cries echoing off the metal walls, and found exactly one human standing in the middle of the vast, dimly lit space. Hands raised. Alone. And here's where I made my first mistake, though I was far too smug to recognize it at the time. I assumed the expression on her face was terror. It was not terror. She appeared to be female, though I will confess that distinguishing human genders has always been something of a challenge for me. They all share these peculiar flat faces, small eyes positioned forward like predators, and skin that comes in a remarkable array of warm shades, as if the species itself could not agree on a single aesthetic. This one had deep brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a tight tail configuration, and wore a plain gray jumpsuit that marked her as standard civilian transport crew. She was small, even by human measurements. She might have reached my mid-chest if she stood on her toes. She was completely alone in a cargo bay large enough to swallow my entire boarding team, surrounded by 8 fully armed Koldrath warriors. And she was not shaking. She was not backing away. She was not crying. She was standing there with her hands up and her chin slightly raised, and she was looking at us with an expression I could not immediately classify. "Please don't shoot," she said, her voice carrying across the cargo bay with complete steadiness. "I'm unarmed." I laughed. I actually laughed, a full, rich, contemptuous laugh, and my boarding team joined in, because honestly, what else was there to do? This was almost too perfect. One human, one small, calm, unarmed human, standing in an empty cargo bay, apparently attempting some form of negotiation with 8 armed Koldrath warriors who had boarded her ship uninvited. "Search the vessel." I ordered my team. "Find the cargo manifest and anything of value." I leveled my pulse rifle in her direction, and let my fangs show when I smiled. "You are coming with me. Consider yourself a hostage, pending ransom negotiations with your government." "Okay," she said. Just that. One word. Flat, agreeable, unbothered. "Okay." As if being seized by an alien military boarding party was a minor scheduling inconvenience, the interstellar equivalent of a delayed transport connection or a spilled cup of morning beverage. No protests, no tears, no desperate bargaining. Just a calm nod and a single syllable of cooperative acceptance. I should have known then. Looking back now, with the terrible clarity of hindsight, I can see the warning clearly. Something deep in my instincts was trying to send up a signal flare, but I was too busy feeling powerful and clever to notice. We brought her back to the Razor Wing. Though brought is generous, and she simply walked alongside us of her own accord, glancing around at everything with what I can only describe as genuine curiosity, like a traveler taking in the local architecture. My crew kept their weapons trained on her throughout. She didn't appear to notice. I took her directly to the command deck. I wanted my entire bridge crew present for this moment. There is something deeply satisfying about returning to your own ship with a captive. It reinforces hierarchy, demonstrates operational success, reminds everyone aboard exactly who is in charge. I also enjoy the theater of it. A prisoner surrounded by weapon systems and tactical displays, standing beneath the full imposing height of a cold draft commander, typically breaks within minutes.